Lena had always thought she understood her husband, Tom. Their marriage, to outsiders, appeared to be just like any other, ordinary, stable, with routine moments of joy and occasional disagreements. They went to work, came home, shared dinners, and laughed over small things. But what most people didn't see was the silent rift growing between them, one that neither had acknowledged until it became undeniable. Their arguments weren't ever about big issues. There were no cheating scandals or major betrayals. Instead, their marriage was chipped away by small, unresolved conflicts, sarcastic comments, off-handed jabs, and moments of emotional neglect. Over time, it became clear that what they had built was more of a facade than a strong foundation. The warmth that once existed between them slowly faded into something colder, more distant. Lena had always believed that every argument was just a small bump, a passing storm in the ocean of their marriage. But she didn't realize how much those unresolved fights were adding up, like drops of water slowly wearing away the rock. There were nights where Tom would come home from work, exhausted, and instead of engaging in meaningful conversation, they'd fall into silence. His eyes, once full of affection, had started to look at her with a quiet frustration that she couldn't decipher. What made things worse was Tom's ability to mask his emotions. He was the kind of man who never let anyone see when something bothered him. To Lena, he always appeared unshaken, unaffected. She admired his calm demeanor, thinking he was simply strong and resolute. But beneath his stoic exterior, Tom was carrying a deep, unspoken insecurity, one that had haunted him for years, buried so deep that even Lena, his wife, had never uncovered it. Tom's insecurities had begun long before they met. It wasn't something he spoke about, not even with his closest friends. But growing up, he'd been the subject of cruel teasing. The whispers about his physical appearance, the whispered jokes behind his back, had always made him feel inadequate. He worked hard to build a facade of confidence, but it wasn't without a price. Over the years, Tom had convinced himself that he had conquered these insecurities, until one fateful night, when Lena unknowingly tore them open. The fight began, as most did, over something trivial, an unresolved issue that had been simmering for weeks. Tom was frustrated. Lena was tired. The tension was palpable, and it only took a few words to escalate it. The argument quickly grew in volume, both of them lobbing complaints back and forth like grenades. Neither of them listened, both too wrapped up in wanting to win the battle rather than resolve it. The words came out sharper and faster, cutting through the air. Lena wanted to win. She wanted to have the final say, to be the one who stood victorious in a marriage that often felt like a tug of war. Her frustration built up over months of emotional distance. And in that moment, her words became a weapon. "You argue so much to be a man," she spat. "No wonder you're so small there." As soon as the words left her mouth, Lena immediately knew something had gone wrong. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The words she had thrown carelessly now hung in the air like a toxic cloud. She expected Tom to lash out, to argue back, to retaliate. But that didn't happen. Instead, Tom froze. His face lost all expression. The words didn't seem to cut him in the way she had hoped to hurt him. They crushed something inside him that had been buried for years. His jaw clenched, his fists tightened, and for the first time, Lena saw the vulnerability in his eyes that she had never noticed before. It wasn't just anger. It wasn't even frustration. It was something deeper, something more painful. Tom didn't shout. He didn't storm out, as she had expected. He simply turned and walked away without a word, without a fight. He left her standing there, in the silence of her own regret. For a moment, Lena thought it was just a brief moment of anger, that he needed space, like he always did after an argument. But as the minutes turned into hours, and then the entire night passed with no word from him, Lena's unease began to grow. The next morning, when she reached out to touch Tom, the other side of the bed was empty. A chill ran through her as she realized this was different. Tom had never just left before, not even during their worst fights. He might have slept on the couch or turned his back on her, but he always came back. But now there was nothing. The cold space between them was more than just physical. It was emotional. And Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally shifted. Lena got up and searched the house, hoping to find him in the kitchen or living room. She found him in the guest room, sitting motionless on the edge of the bed. He wasn't packing or angry. He was just there, empty, detached. Something inside him had shut down completely. She called his name, but he barely acknowledged her. Tom's silence was suffocating. He didn't yell. He didn't scream. He didn't even speak. He just became a shell of the man she once knew. And Lena was left to wonder whether her careless words had irreparably broken something inside him. Days passed in an unbearable silence. Lena did everything she could think of to fix things. She tried to apologize, of course, but it felt like Tom wasn't even listening. He didn't yell at her, didn't accuse her, didn't even try to defend himself. He simply pulled further away, emotionally shutting down with every passing hour. She attempted to reach out to him in small ways, cooking his favorite meals, cleaning the house, trying to create moments of normalcy. She made jokes, tried to lighten the mood, and left notes for him, hoping he'd find a way to talk about what had happened. But nothing worked. Tom would nod politely, but the warmth, the connection they once shared, was gone. His responses were cold and distant. When she brushed past him, hoping for the closeness they used to have, he stiffened, avoiding any kind of touch or affection. It was like she was a stranger to him. Lena was used to arguing, but this felt different. This wasn't the usual heated exchange where, eventually, they would cool off and reconcile. This wasn't a normal fight. This wasn't just about her careless words. This was deeper. His silence wasn't just a reaction to her insult. It felt like an irreversible decision. He was erasing her from his life, bit by bit, and Lena didn't know how to stop it. She had never seen him like this. She had always known Tom as someone who would voice his feelings, even if it was through anger. But now, there was nothing. The days turned into a blur. Lena tried to be patient, convincing herself that eventually he would come around, but the more she tried to talk, the more he retreated, and with every step he took away from her, her heart broke a little more. The person she loved so deeply was slipping through her fingers, and she couldn't find a way to stop it. She tried to convince herself that it was just a phase, that Tom needed space, but deep down she knew the truth. That moment she had crossed the line with her words was not something that could be undone. She had triggered something in him that went far beyond a simple argument. The damage was done, and now she wasn't sure if there was any way back. One evening, Lena walked past the guest room and stopped dead in her tracks. The door was slightly ajar, and she caught sight of Tom packing a suitcase. Her breath caught in her throat as panic washed over her. He was really leaving. She had tried everything to fix the mess she had created, but it was clear now that nothing she did was going to change his mind. Her mind raced. Was this really happening? Was Tom actually walking away from their marriage over a single argument? The realization hit her like a ton of bricks, and, for the first time in her life, she felt completely powerless. She had always believed that love could heal all wounds, that regret could be undone with enough effort. But now, she wasn't so sure. This was something bigger than her. This was something she couldn't fix by simply saying the right words or performing the right gestures. Lena stepped into the room, her heart pounding in her chest. "Are you really leaving?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. She was afraid to hear the answer, afraid that it was already too late. Tom didn't look at her right away. He stood there, frozen for a moment, his hands gripping the edge of the suitcase, like he was holding onto the last remnants of his will. Finally, he turned to face her, his eyes distant. "I don't know if I can get past this," he said, his voice quiet but firm. The words hit her like a punch in the gut. She had expected anger, shouting, an argument, but instead she was met with the calm acceptance of something she couldn't control. For the first time in weeks, she saw something in Tom's eyes. A finality, a resignation that left her breathless. "I love you," she pleaded, stepping closer to him, tears streaming down her face. "I messed up. I would take it back if I could. But I can't. Please, just tell me what I can do." Tom remained silent for a moment, his gaze shifting to the suitcase, then back to her. He didn't speak right away, and Lena felt her heart shatter with every passing second. She wasn't ready to lose him. Not like this. But the more she looked at him, the more she realized that his silence wasn't just the result of her words. It was about everything they had neglected over the years. It was about the emotional distance, the unresolved issues, the hurt they had both ignored for far too long. Finally, Tom spoke again, his voice soft but resolute. "You can't take back what you said. I can unhear it. But maybe I don't want to walk away. Not yet." Lena's heart fluttered with hope, but it was fragile. The truth was, nothing would be the same again. She couldn't undo the damage she had caused. What they had now was a fragile thread of hope, and she didn't know if it would hold. Tom didn't leave that night, but the damage was done. It was clear that the road to healing would be long and uncertain. They were no longer the same couple they had been before the argument, and Lena was left wondering, could their marriage survive this? Could they rebuild what had been broken? Or had they already crossed a point of no return? The days following that night were full of tension and uncertainty. Tom had stayed, but he wasn't really there. Lena could feel the walls he had built around himself, and no matter what she did, she couldn't seem to break through. Every gesture of affection she offered was met with cold indifference. Every word she spoke was met with silence. Tom was physically present, but emotionally, he was miles away. Lena spent each day trying to act normal, pretending as if nothing had changed. But deep down, she knew the truth. Things would never go back to how they were. In the first few days, she tried to apologize in every way she could think of. She made his favorite meals, left small notes around the house, hoping something might spark a reaction. But Tom barely ate his meals and didn't even glance at the notes. He stayed on the edge, disconnected, not giving her the chance to heal the rift. It was as if he had already started pulling away, mentally and emotionally, preparing for the inevitable. He was leaving. Lena's frustration and fear grew with each passing day. She had always believed that the hard times were just temporary, that they could be fixed with a little effort and time. But this felt different. It was more than just a fight. It was as if she had broken something that couldn't be mended with simple apologies. It wasn't just about the words she had said. It was about years of unresolved issues, emotional neglect, and the silent resentment that had been festering beneath the surface of their marriage. Tom had been carrying his own burden of insecurities for years. Lena had never fully understood how deep those insecurities ran until now. The teasing he endured as a teenager, the betrayal in his past relationships, and the emotional scars that came with them had shaped him into the man he was today, strong on the outside but fragile on the inside. When Lena made her cutting remark, she had unknowingly torn open a wound that had never fully healed. It was a painful realization for Lena to come to terms with. Her words weren't just an insult. They were the trigger that exposed everything Tom had buried deep inside. The silent rage, the hurt, the years of trying to convince himself that he was enough. All of it came rushing to the surface in that one moment. One evening, as Lena sat in the living room, waiting for Tom to come home from work, she made a decision. She had to stop waiting for things to magically fix themselves. She had to take control of the situation and face the truths. Tom had been avoiding her, but she couldn't avoid the truth anymore. She knew that if their marriage was going to survive, it would take more than just her apologies. It would take deep, honest conversations, vulnerability, and the willingness to confront the hurt they had both buried for so long. That night, when Tom walked through the door, Lena didn't wait for him to speak. She didn't wait for him to acknowledge her. She walked up to him, her heart pounding in her chest. She took his hands in hers, looking into his eyes with a mixture of fear and determination. "I can't fix what I've done," she said softly, her voice trembling. "But I can try to understand. I want to understand the hurt I caused, not just with my words, but with everything. I don't want to lose you. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild what we have. Please, talk to me for the first time in days." Tom looked at her, really looked at her. His eyes softened, but there was still that deep sadness lurking behind them. He didn't respond right away, but his hands gently squeezed hers. And for a brief moment, Lena felt like maybe there was still hope. The silence between them wasn't gone, but it wasn't as suffocating as it had been. There was an opening, a small crack in the wall Tom had built around himself. And for the first time, Lena didn't feel completely hopeless. The next few weeks were filled with difficult conversations, painful revelations, and moments of raw vulnerability. They talked about their insecurities, the things they had never said out loud before. Lena listened as Tom shared his past, his fears, his deep-rooted insecurities, the things he had kept hidden from her for years. He told her about the bullying in high school, the relationship betrayals, and the way he had tried to shield himself from pain by never truly letting anyone in. Lena, in turn, opened up about her own feelings, the frustrations she had kept to herself, the fears she had about their marriage, and how her own emotional distance had contributed to the issues between them. They cried together, shared their regrets, and slowly began to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. It wasn't easy. There were days when the old wounds resurfaced, when the silence between them was thick again. But they kept trying, kept pushing forward, knowing that the road to healing would take time. Lena realized that love wasn't just about the good moments, the shared laughter, or the happy days. It was about weathering the storms together, about confronting the ugly parts of each other, and learning to love each other through the mess. One evening, as Lena and Tom sat together, holding hands in the quiet of their living room, Tom finally spoke. "I'm not saying everything's perfect, but I'm willing to try," he said, his voice quieter than before, but with a sense of resolve. "I'm not sure if we can go back to what we were, but I'm willing to see if we can build something new." And for the first time in weeks, Lena smiled. It wasn't a promise that everything would be okay, but it was a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, their love could survive the damage. It was the first step on a long road to healing, a road they would walk together, hand in hand.